So we're going to end this week by talking about cardiorespiratory adaptations to resistance training. Okay, and so we want to know what happens during anaerobic and resistance training and what's the benefit. Now, as you're probably all aware, when you start to exercise, and really this goes for aerobic, anaerobic, resistance training, all of these things happen. You increase your heart rate, you increase your stroke volume, you increase your mean arterial pressure, you increase your cardiac output. Okay, so that's nothing new. So what happens when we train? There's some evidence to suggest that resistance training or anaerobic training will decrease resting heart rate, but that's unclear. But you might have decreased, but it appears that you'll decrease your pressure, both systolic and diastolic, as well as mean. You'll also have a decreased rate pressure product. Remember, that's heart rate times systolic blood pressure. This is something that you talked about in lab. This gives you an idea of how hard your heart is working. Okay, and so if we just decrease systolic blood pressure and heart rate stays the same, that'll decrease rate pressure product. If we decrease both, then that's even better, right? We're going to really decrease it. Ultimately, what will happen is that we have increased left ventricular wall thickness. And so what that does is that allows us, one, to have a lower heart rate so that we can fill up. I'm not saying it causes the lower heart rate, but I'm saying we can compensate for it. By lower heart rate, we have a greater stroke volume. By having that increased ventricular wall thickness, the heart will be able to contract harder, and so more blood will be able to leave the heart with every contraction. So that's good. Now, what happens during exercise after training? Okay, well, you have smaller changes in heart rate, smaller changes in blood pressure, but there's no real difference in oxygen extraction. And this shouldn't come as a surprise. We're talking about anaerobic resistance training. These are activities that are generally short in duration, higher intensity. Okay, and so we're not even going to, they're anaerobic, right? So we're not going to be using as much oxygen. And so it's not a surprise that there's not much change in oxygen extraction. And remember from our aerobic unit that when we're talking about oxygen extraction, we've got to be able to, one, get it into the muscle, so get oxygen into the muscle, and two, be able to use that oxygen in the muscle. If you recall from what we talked about last time, we didn't really talk about, or two videos ago, we didn't talk about, hey, we're increasing myoglobin and we're increasing mitochondria and things like that. We're talking about fiber size, and with fiber size, more cross bridges, more force, but we're not changing the muscle in a way that will allow it to use oxygen, because the activities that we're doing during these types of trainings don't really require, it's not that they don't require oxygen, but we don't take advantage of that oxygen because they're such high intensity. So then we've got the cardiorespiratory system. Okay, this shouldn't come as a surprise. Ventilation's not a limiting factor. It's rarely a limiting factor ever, but it's definitely not with resistance or anaerobic exercise. Okay, as I was just discussing, we have to get, we're not using a lot of oxygen here. Okay, we're performing exercises at such a high intensity that they can't go through that oxidative process quickly enough to get the ATP. And so, yes, our ventilation does increase during exercise, and there is an increased oxygen demand, but we can't meet that demand with the oxidative systems. And so we go until we can't go anymore, relying mostly on our ATP PCR and our glycolytic systems. But training can be beneficial, okay? And what happens, just like with aerobic exercise, is that we increase our tidal volume and we decrease our respiratory rate during submaximal exercise. Okay, during max exercise, we actually increase both of these. All right, so we're able to take more air in and out and get more air in and out. And this leads to what we call an improved ventilatory efficiency, or something called VEVO2. And this is something that also translates into aerobic exercise. And we'll talk a little bit about it in lecture, and I'll actually have some figures for you that help this concept make more sense. But basically what we're saying is that if you have a high ventilatory efficiency, that for every liter of air you're bringing into your body, into your lungs, you're going to be able to take up a greater amount of oxygen. And kind of the easiest way to think about this is, well, if I take a bigger breath of air, that means more air is actually making it to the alveoli and undergoing gas exchange. And so that is a benefit to training, both aerobic and anaerobic. And with that, we will end. I guess before I go any further, I just want you to know that we will discuss this a little more in detail in lab, in lecture. And if you've got questions, please bring them, and I will do my best to answer them.